Declan Rice has now missed 2 days of England training in a row. He has been struck down by illness, and FA officials have made the decision to isolate him from the rest of the squad. This is not a small precaution. This is a deliberate move to stop a potential outbreak from spreading through the England camp. And it is happening at the worst possible time, because Rice was already managing a hamstring problem and a lower back issue heading into the quarter-final against Norway in Miami. Think about what that means for a player who is supposed to be the engine of both his national team and his club side. 2 days without training is not just about missing repetition on the grass. It is about rhythm, sharpness, and physical readiness disappearing at the exact moment they are needed most. Here is what is actually at risk. Declan Rice is not just another midfielder. He is the player Arsenal have built their midfield identity around for the defending Premier League champions. If he is isolated from training, if the illness lingers, if the hamstring and back issues resurface because his body has not been properly conditioned in the days before a quarter-final, then England's World Cup run is suddenly far less secure than it looked a week ago. And for Arsenal supporters watching from home, there is a second layer of concern sitting quietly underneath the first. Rice's summer is supposed to end in rest and recovery before pre-season begins in mid-July. An illness like this, combined with existing physical issues, is exactly the kind of situation that can turn a short-term worry into a longer-term fitness concern once he reports back to Mikel Arteta. If you want the full picture on every one of these Arsenal stories, the transfers, the injuries, and the decisions being made behind the scenes, this is the channel to subscribe to. Hit that subscribe button now, because we are about to go through every piece of this puzzle one at a time. Let us start exactly where we opened, with Declan Rice. The information here is direct and confirmed. Declan Rice has missed 2 days of England training in a row after being struck down by illness. FA officials have isolated him from the group to contain a potential outbreak. On top of that illness, Rice was already managing a hamstring issue and a lower back problem ahead of the quarter-final against Norway in Miami. My read on this is simple. This is a compounding situation, not an isolated one. When a player is already carrying 2 separate physical issues into a knockout match, illness is not just an inconvenience, it is a multiplier. The isolation protocol tells us the FA is treating this seriously enough to remove him entirely from group training rather than managing him carefully within it. That is a stronger response than a routine knock would require. For Arsenal, whose entire midfield platform in the league title win was built around Rice's engine and control, any extended disruption to his conditioning in the final weeks before pre-season is worth watching closely. Now to the second story, and this one shifts us fully into transfer business. Arsenal are ready to finalise a £35 million transfer for Club Brugge winger Christos Tzolis. This is described clearly as Arsenal being ready to complete the deal. What stands out to me here is the word ready. This is not a speculative link or an early-stage inquiry. This is a club at the finishing stages of a deal for a winger, and £35 million is a serious statement of intent for a player arriving from Club Brugge. If this does complete, it tells us Arsenal are not simply reacting to one position of need. They are building depth and competition in wide areas at the same time other business is happening elsewhere on the pitch. A move at this stage, this close to finalisation, usually means the framework of the deal, personal terms and structure, is already agreed, and what remains is the final formality. Next, we move to Leandro Trossard, and this is where the picture becomes more delicate. Besiktas are eager to complete the signing of Leandro Trossard as soon as possible. However, the player's representative prefers to wait until after Belgium's World Cup match against Spain. Negotiations between the two parties are described as still ongoing. This is a clear example of urgency on one side and patience on the other. Besiktas want this done quickly. Trossard's camp wants to protect his focus and performance for Belgium first. That is a completely rational position for a player mid-tournament, but it also tells us the deal is not yet finished, no matter how eager the buying club is. For Arsenal, this matters because Trossard leaving would open a genuine gap in attacking options, and the timeline now appears to be tied not to Arsenal's own summer planning, but to how far Belgium go in the World Cup. Until that international commitment is resolved, this remains an ongoing negotiation, not a completed exit. Now let us look at a name being floated as an option rather than a confirmed target, Manu Kone. The suggestion here is that Manu Kone could be a smart value option for Arsenal's midfield. His performance against Morocco is highlighted as showing the qualities Mikel Arteta values, completing 35 of 38 passes, creating a chance, winning 3 of 4 ground duels, and making 5 recoveries. He is described as combining physical power with technical ability, allowing him to carry the ball through pressure and protect the defence. At 25 years old, he is presented as someone with the experience to contribute immediately while potentially costing less than some elite midfield targets. His ability to press, cover ground, break lines and operate as a dynamic number 8 is framed as fitting Arsenal's high-intensity style. I want to be precise here because this is analysis and opinion, not a confirmed Arsenal move. There is no indication of contact, inquiry or negotiation between Arsenal and Kone's club in what has been presented. What we do have are hard numbers from a real performance: 35 of 38 passes completed, 3 of 4 ground duels won, 5 recoveries. Those numbers do support the profile being suggested, a midfielder who protects the ball and the defence in equal measure. But viewers should treat this strictly as a suggested option being discussed publicly, not as a move Arsenal have initiated. Now we get into the story that is dominating Arsenal's midfield conversation this summer, Bruno Guimaraes, and there are multiple layers to unpack here. The first piece of information comes from David Ornstein of The Athletic, who says there is a feeling around Arsenal that this is a deal they would like to make happen. However, the club are not rushing the process. Despite Newcastle's insistence that Guimaraes is not for sale, Arsenal believe they have time to assess the situation. Sporting director Andrea Berta is said to be determined not to overpay, with Arsenal focused on securing the right players at the right price while keeping multiple options open. What I take from this is a club that wants the player but is refusing to be pressured into panic spending. Newcastle publicly saying a player is not for sale is a common negotiating position, but Arsenal's patience, combined with Berta's stated determination not to overpay, tells us the club is treating this as a long game rather than a race. Keeping multiple options open, which lines up with the Manu Kone suggestion and the Danilo Santos interest we will come to shortly, shows a club building leverage rather than fixating on one single name. The second piece on Guimaraes is more advanced. Bruno Guimaraes has already verbally agreed terms with Arsenal. Newcastle still insist their captain is not for sale and deny any direct negotiations have taken place yet, but Arsenal are expected to place a formal bid. This is a meaningful escalation from the first piece of information. A verbal agreement on personal terms is a significant step. It means the player side of the equation, wages, contract length, and personal commitment, is essentially settled. What remains is the club-to-club business, and Newcastle's continued public denial of any negotiations shows the classic gap between what is happening informally and what is being confirmed officially. The expectation of a formal bid is the next concrete step to watch for. Until that bid is submitted and responded to, this remains an advancing situation rather than a completed transfer. Now let us bring in the written analysis on Guimaraes, because this adds essential context around why Arsenal are pursuing him in the first place. Since joining Newcastle from Lyon in January 2022, Bruno Guimaraes has contributed 31 goals and 32 assists in 195 appearances for the club, developing into a world-class midfielder in that period. He has just 2 years remaining on his contract, which makes an exit now a logical point for a transfer. Early discussions have already taken place, and an offer of around £55 million was rejected last month. Now, Guimaraes wants to leave Newcastle, and Arsenal have indicated they are willing to go up to £60 million to sign him. Arsenal have tracked the midfielder since his time in France 4 years ago, and Mikel Arteta is described as an admirer of the Brazilian. Newcastle have already allowed Sandro Tonali and Anthony Gordon to leave this summer, and their failure to qualify for the Champions League is highlighted as a significant factor behind the club's major departures. My analysis here focuses on the contract timeline and the rejected bid. 2 years remaining on a contract is exactly the kind of situation that pushes a selling club toward a decision, because waiting longer only reduces the value further. The fact that £55 million was already rejected, and Arsenal are now prepared to go as high as £60 million, tells us there is a real financial gap being closed in real time, not a token opening offer. Newcastle's Champions League absence, combined with 2 other high-profile departures already completed this summer, builds a picture of a club in a period of transition, which strengthens Arsenal's position even while Berta refuses to be rushed into overpaying. The proposed midfield combination discussed alongside this, Declan Rice, Bruno Guimaraes and Martin Odegaard, with Martin Zubimendi, Miles Lewis-Skelly and Mikel Merino as options from the bench, paints a picture of considerable strength in depth if this move is completed. The added detail about Arsenal's pre-season beginning in mid-July, with the first fixture against Girona on August the 1st, gives us the practical deadline pressure Andrea Berta is working against, even while he is publicly committed to not overpaying. Now to the final transfer story, Danilo Santos. Arsenal have reportedly opened talks over Botafogo midfielder Danilo Santos. The Gunners are said to have made contact with the 25-year-old's representatives as they explore midfield reinforcements, with Manchester United also interested. Botafogo had hoped to command a fee of around £34 million, but after Danilo played a limited role at the World Cup, the Brazilian club could now be willing to accept less. This story fits directly into the pattern we have already seen. Arsenal opening talks while Manchester United are also interested tells us this is a genuinely competitive market, not a one-club negotiation. The detail about a limited World Cup role potentially lowering Botafogo's asking price is significant, because it shows market value shifting in real time based on tournament performance and visibility. Exactly the kind of leverage a sporting director like Andrea Berta would want to use to avoid overpaying, which lines up precisely with what Ornstein reported about Arsenal's overall approach this summer. We now move away from the screenshots and into the two written pieces, starting with Ethan Nwaneri. Ethan Nwaneri has been urged to leave Arsenal this summer and go out on loan. He had a disappointing 2025-2026 season, despite Arsenal winning the Premier League for the first time in 22 years. The 19-year-old made just 12 appearances under Mikel Arteta last campaign, with most of his minutes coming off the bench, and his sole goal contribution coming in the League Cup. He was sent out on loan to Marseille in January, but found himself out of the team after Roberto De Zerbi left his role as head coach. Nwaneri returned to Arsenal in May and picked up his Premier League winners' medal after the final day match at Crystal Palace. He was also part of the trophy parade celebrations before spending a week with the England senior squad in the United States as part of World Cup preparations. He will report for pre-season training in mid-July, and it is stated clearly that the club need to sort his future out before the new season begins on August the 21st, because it is clear Nwaneri needs to play to further his development. Former United States international Freddie Adu describes Nwaneri as facing a tough period. Adu explains that when a young player is propped up during good form and then hits adversity, patience from those around him tends to disappear, and that consistency takes time to develop for any young player working through ups and downs. Adu states that Nwaneri will have to make the right decision, and that if he does go on loan, it needs to be somewhere he will actually play regularly, because going out and still not playing would be worse than staying at Arsenal. Adu adds that it does not need to be a top club, it simply needs to be a place where he plays. Adu specifically names Aston Villa as what he calls a perfect team for Nwaneri. Here is my analysis of this situation. The numbers alone tell a clear story: 12 appearances across an entire title-winning season, mostly from the bench, and only one goal contribution, which came in a cup competition rather than the league. That is a significant drop in game time for a player who was previously seen as one of the most promising young talents at the club. The Marseille loan adding a coaching change into the mix, with Roberto De Zerbi leaving and Nwaneri subsequently losing his place there too, compounds the problem, because it means he has now had a difficult season at both club level and loan level in the same campaign. The one bright spot, and it is a real one, is that he still collected a Premier League winners' medal, took part in the trophy parade, and spent time with the full England squad in the United States. That tells us his standing with England, at least for now, remains positive despite the lack of club minutes, which is unusual and worth watching closely. Adu's point about patience for young players is presented as his personal view rather than a stated fact from Arsenal, and it should be treated that way, but the practical advice underneath it, that a loan destination needs to guarantee playing time rather than simply be a big-name club, is a reasonable read given the appearance numbers we have just gone through. Aston Villa being named as a perfect destination is Adu's opinion and remains firmly in rumour and pundit suggestion territory, not a confirmed move, and it should be presented to you exactly that way. Now to the final piece, the wider debate around Bruno Guimaraes joining Arsenal from two of Football.London's writers, which adds further texture to everything we have already covered on this transfer. Sam Truelove lays out the numbers we already touched on: 31 goals and 32 assists in 195 appearances since January 2022, 2 years remaining on his contract, and the £55 million bid that was rejected last month before Arsenal's willingness to go up to £60 million. He describes Guimaraes as someone who would add bite and passion to an Arsenal midfield that could line up with Declan Rice, Guimaraes and Martin Odegaard, with Martin Zubimendi, Miles Lewis-Skelly and Mikel Merino providing options from the bench. He states that with pre-season starting in mid-July and the first fixture on August the 1st against Girona, sporting director Andrea Berta should look to strike a deal as soon as possible. Patrick Austin-Hardy adds that this would be a statement signing, arguing that defending Premier League champions often get their transfers wrong after winning the title, and framing Guimaraes as exactly what Arteta needs to consolidate Arsenal's position before thinking about long-term dominance. He suggests Guimaraes could either form a partnership alongside Declan Rice or play ahead of him, given Rice is described as being in need of rest. He describes Guimaraes as able to combine graceful passing and creativity with gritty aggression, which he says mirrors Arteta's Arsenal as a whole, and states that Guimaraes would lift the midfield toward what he calls a potentially Champions League winning level. My analysis of this final piece is that it functions as informed opinion built directly on top of the confirmed transfer details, rather than new factual reporting. The appearance numbers, the contract length, and the rejected £55 million bid are all consistent with what we already established from the earlier Guimaraes story, which gives this analysis a solid factual foundation, even though the conclusions themselves, that this is a statement signing, that it would lift Arsenal to a Champions League winning level, are the writer's personal judgment, rather than confirmed outcomes. What is worth noting is the recurring theme of Declan Rice needing rest, which now connects directly back to where we started this entire analysis: Rice's illness and existing physical issues on international duty. If Arsenal do complete a move for Guimaraes, the timing could not be more relevant given the fitness picture we opened with today. To summarise where every one of these Arsenal stories currently stands, Declan Rice is isolated with illness on top of an existing hamstring and back issue ahead of a World Cup quarter-final. That is a confirmed and developing fitness situation. The Christos Tzolis move for £35 million is described as ready to be finalised, a deal at an advanced stage. The Leandro Trossard situation with Besiktas is an ongoing negotiation, paused by the player's own preference to focus on Belgium's World Cup campaign first. Manu Kone is a suggested option built on strong individual performance data, not a confirmed target. Bruno Guimaraes has verbally agreed personal terms, with a formal bid expected, while Newcastle continue to publicly deny any negotiations, making this an advancing but not yet completed transfer. Danilo Santos is an early-stage contact, competing directly with Manchester United's interest, and Ethan Nwaneri's future remains unresolved, with a loan being urged by outside voices and Aston Villa floated as a suggested destination, but nothing confirmed by the club itself. That is the complete picture as it stands today. If you want every update on these stories as they develop, the Rice fitness situation, the Guimaraes bid, the Nwaneri decision, make sure you are subscribed, because this is where you will get it broken down properly, piece by piece, with the confirmed facts always kept separate from the speculation.